The Nun of St. Catherine's. Part 1. 1734. Nunnery of St. Catherine's, England. A cold morning mist covered the cobbled quadrangle and slunk through the cloisters as Sister Anna Stone ran frantically from the dormitories over to the infirmary building. She was desperately needed. All she'd been told was that a young boy had been gored by a bull and was seriously injured. She pushed open the infirmary doors, letting the mist snake in behind her, as if seeking warmth from the bitter air. It had just gone 6 in the morning. She was met by the nun on duty. "Where is he?" asked Sister Anna breathlessly. "The far bed. How bad is he?" "You will see." The other nun, whose name was Sister Mary Lockridge, led her past the other beds, where most of the patients were still sleeping, to the injured child. He lay under a blanket, his chest heaving, his face pale and clammy. When Sister Mary pulled back the blanket and removed the cotton rag to expose the wound, Sister Anna let out a slight gasp. The child's belly had a large, deep gash, from which blood was seeping fast. "I have been trying to stem the flow, but—" She paused and looked at Sister Anna in despair, whispering, "It is not working." She stole a glance at the little boy's pale face. He could not have been any older than 12. "Who brought him in?" asked Sister Anna. "A farmer. The boy lives rough on the land. Both his parents are dead." Sister Anna sighed in frustration. "Why has nobody taken him to the orphanage?" "I don't know. He has come to the commoners' hall a few times, especially when the weather is really bad. And he has been fed." "Oh yes, now that you mention it, I do recall seeing him briefly once." Sister Anna now examined him. "He is so thin. This poor child. God bless him." "What do we do?" asked Mary. "Let me take care of him. Get me more cotton rags, and ask the Mother Superior to send for Dr. Harding at once." "The surgeon?" "Yes. Now go." The surgeon, a local man who lived in the town, arrived within an hour, carrying with him his bag of surgical tools. He examined the boy's wound. "Can you suture it, doctor?" asked Sister Anna. Harding shook his head. "It is not good to suture a wound like this. The bad humours gather here, and we must allow drainage. To allow this wound to heal, we must leave it open. What I can do is stuff the wound with a porous material. It's rather like lint, and that can help with drainage as well, while at least blocking up the wound." "Thank you, doctor. Will you let me assist you?" "Of course, sister." After the procedure had been done, Sister Anna kept vigil over the boy. He was in a high fever, and for days she bathed his head in a cool, damp cloth. She prayed continuously, rarely leaving his side, and never leaving the infirmary itself. One night, after falling asleep in the chair, she was woken by a light squeeze on her hand. She opened her eyes with a start. The boy was conscious, and he had stretched out his hand to take hers. "Sorry," he whispered. Sister Anna immediately leaned forward, all her senses coming back to her. "Not at all," she whispered. "I am delighted to see that you are awake. You have been suffering from fever for the past few days." "May I have some water?" he asked. Sister Anna smiled. "Of course. I will be right back." She returned with a jug and a ceramic cup. She poured him out a measure, and then helped him to drink it, by lifting his head off the rough pillow and bringing the cup to his dry lips. He took a few sips before pausing for breath. Then he finished what was left. "You know where you are, don't you?" she asked. The boy made a little nod of his head. "You've been in the commoners' hall a few times. Do you also know that there is an orphanage in town that takes in children?" "I don't want to go back there," he said, his face now taking on a look of fear. "The masters beat you there and locked you in cupboards. I ran away." "Oh, sweetheart," said Sister Anna, laying her hand on the boy's arm. "Promise you will not send me back there." "I promise." The boy seemed to relax. "What is your name?" "Robbie," he whispered. "I'm Sister Anna, but just call me Anna," she said, squeezing his hand kindly. He gave her a little smile, and the nun's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "I was crossing the field, the one with the angry bull." "That was dangerous, Robbie. Why did you do that?" "I don't know. I was halfway across when he saw me. I ran, but I slipped in a cow pat." Robbie started to giggle. Sister Anna's eyebrows rose in some surprise, before she too began to laugh at the humorous side of the mishap. "You have to watch out for those cow pats," she said. Robbie started to laugh harder, but before Sister Anna could warn him that his laughter might wake the other patients, Robbie groaned in pain. "My stomach!" "It is because you are laughing," said Sister Anna, smiling. "When you laugh you use your stomach muscles. Just try and refrain from it." She paused for a few moments before asking, "Robbie, what happened to your parents?" "They died from plague. When they knew they had it, they had me taken to the orphanage. I was only 3 apparently." "Do you know how old you are now?" 11. My parents were asked how old I was when they handed me over, and my birth date. I grew up there. I never saw my parents again. It is a horrible place. A while ago I managed to escape by climbing from a dormitory window. I ran away into the countryside and hid. I knew they would come looking for me, but I think they have given up now. I don't think they really care. One less scrawny child to look after. I eat better in the commoner's hall than I ever did in the orphanage. There they fed us on a thin broth." Sister Anna felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to Robbie's tale of woe. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Robbie made a sad smile. A candle flickered on the wall, and a patient's gentle cough sounded from a bed. "Where do you usually sleep at night?" asked Sister Anna. "In the wood. I built myself a den out of sticks and moss, but when it is very cold I come here, or if I haven't caught any fish in the river or a rabbit in my trap." "You sound very resourceful, Robbie," said Sister Anna. He looked at her with a quizzical stare. "Oh, I'm sorry. I simply mean you are able to take care of yourself well. You can build traps. You can fish and make shelter." Robbie nodded. "Where did you learn those skills?" He shrugged. "I don't know." After a little more talking, Sister Anna let Robbie go back to sleep, and decided it would be all right to return to her cell. There was already another nun in attendance. She felt a sudden lightness of heart and a need to pray. She lowered herself to her knees in front of the wooden crucifix that had been nailed to the wall, and bowed her head. "My dear Lord and Saviour, thank you for bringing Robbie into our midst. Thank you for bringing him into my life. I feel a deep love for him stirring inside me, that of a mother's love. He is one of your fragile lambs, Lord. Naturally he was drawn to your house. I want to look after him. I want to make sure that he never suffers again." The next morning she awoke, with one purpose in mind, to speak to the Mother Superior and arrange for Robbie to be allowed to live and work on the grounds. After their first service of the day, she caught up with the Mother Superior as she was making her way back to her little office. "Mother Superior, I must speak with you urgently." "Of course, my child." When Sister Anna was seated in the office, she spoke. "It is of the little boy I wish to speak about, Mother." "Tell me." "He has been here a few days now, recovering from his wounds. He had a fever, but last night he opened his eyes and spoke to me. He ran away from the orphanage, as he was most unhappy there, and now lives in the woods. I do not want to send him back to the orphanage. I promised him I wouldn't. But he needs somewhere to stay, someone to feed him." She bowed her head. "Someone to love him." The Mother Superior smiled. "You have grown attached to him, haven't you, my child?" Sister Anna nodded. She raised her head again, and as she stared into the Mother Superior's eyes, she did indeed feel like a child. "I understand." The woman regarded Anna for a time in silence. "I remember when you first arrived at St. Catherine's. In your interview I asked you why you wanted to become a nun. Tell me again what your reasons were." Sister Anna spoke quietly. "I had a husband. He was a good man. I became pregnant soon after our marriage." Tears now spilled down Sister Anna's face. "I lost the child before it even came into the world. A year later I became pregnant again. This time it was a boy. But he was stillborn." Sister Anna gasped as a wave of sorrow washed over her. "He was so beautiful." She wept for him now. "My husband left me. I had nobody. My parents would not take me in. They said I was cursed. My only hope was St. Catherine's. Here I would have a place to exist, and in return I would devote myself entirely to God." "You see your lost children in Robbie, do you not?" said the Mother Superior gently. Sister Anna could only nod. "Especially your son." Sister Anna wailed. "It is only natural that you should feel this way. And you are right. He needs somewhere to stay. I will allow him to stay, my child. He can do odd jobs in around the nunnery, and he can bunk with James, the ostler, in the hayloft above the horses." Sister Anna clasped her hands together, the tears drying up almost immediately, like water droplets on a hot stone. "Oh, Mother Superior, thank you!" she cried. "You are truly a wonderful woman." The Mother Superior smiled meekly. Sister Anna ran back to the infirmary to tell Robbie the good news. When he heard, his eyes went wide, and his smile was so large it almost spread the width of his face. "I don't have to go back to the woods?" he gasped. "No," said Sister Anna, shaking her head. "You'll be bedding down in a warm hayloft every night, and you'll have company. James, the ostler. He looks after any horses that come in with visitors. He is a very cheery young man. You will like him, I'm sure. You could even learn to help him with the horses." "I love horses. They're so beautiful. There used to be one in a barn next to where my parents lived. I remember my father lifting me up to feed it carrots. I used to go up and stroke them in the fields around here. They were friendlier than the bull." "Yes, although they are very powerful in their own way. They can give you a very nasty kick if you're not careful. But James will teach you that." "When can I move from here?" asked Robbie. "As soon as you are a little better. You are still a little weak after the fever, and the surgeon will have to have a look at that wound to see how it's doing. I have to go and do my duties now, but I will come back and see you later." Sister Anna was busy all that day, and only after the evening service was she free to go and see him. As she approached his bed, she saw 2 nuns leaning over him. "How is he?" she asked. The nuns turned their faces to her at the same time, and she could tell by their expressions that something was wrong. Sister Anna's smile vanished immediately. "What?" "He is dead," whispered one. Sister Anna looked at Robbie in the bed. His eyes were closed, and he was perfectly still. She shook her head as a coldness crept through her body. "No, you are mistaken. I spoke to him only hours ago. He was getting better." "I am sorry, sister. I do not know what happened." She rushed to the boy's side and clasped his hand. It was ice cold, like a piece of meat that is lain on a stone slab for hours. She began trying to rub some heat back into it. "Robbie," she whispered desperately, "you are just cold. I will warm you up. I will bring you some hot broth in the kitchens. You would like that, I know. And then you will feel better." The nuns stood and watched her in silence. "Robbie, open your eyes. Please. Open your eyes and look at me." The eyes did not open. She suddenly raised her face to the ceiling and screamed, "God, how could you do this to me? How could you let me lose another child? What have I done to you? Why am I cursed?" She was screaming with all the strength of her lungs. The 2 nuns grabbed hold of her and began pulling her out of the infirmary. "Robbie! I love you! I'm so sorry!" The infirmary door closed, separating the 2 of them. Sister Anna Stone was taken back to her cell. She was hysterical. The Mother Superior was called for. She sat on the bed next to Sister Anna and enfolded her into her arms. She began a fervent prayer, rocking the girl backwards and forwards in a soothing motion. It was hours later. Night had fallen on St. Catherine's, and a full moon bathed it in silver. There was complete stillness as Sister Anna opened her eyes. She sat up slowly in the dark. The moonlight illuminated a patch of floor as it shone through the little window. Sister Anna stood up. Almost in a trance, she left her cell and walked out into the corridor in her bare feet. She climbed to the top floor of the dormitory building and opened a door that led to the flat roof. A breeze immediately rustled her nightdress and created goosebumps on her arms. The roof was surrounded by a crenellated wall. She now stepped up onto it, her eyes on the bright moon and that clear, star-studded sky. And then she fell out. into the arms of God. Part 2. The doors to A&E slid open, and a stretcher was shoved through them. It held 11-year-old Daniel Morgan. In his abdomen was a stab wound. A woman ran alongside the stretcher. "It's all right, Daniel. You're going to be fine. Just hang in there." Daniel was fading in and out of consciousness. He was being taken to X-ray. At the doors, the paramedic turned. "Lizzie, wasn't it?" The woman nodded. "I'm afraid you'll need to stay out here." "I understand," she replied, nodding, her chest heaving. "Someone will be out to speak to you as soon as possible. You can have a seat in the waiting area." "Thank you." The waiting area was just across the corridor. Before sitting down, she went to the coffee machine. An X-ray was taken of Daniel's wound. The blade had gone deep. "It's missed the liver, thank God," said the technician. "But there's damage to the large intestine. This boy needs to be taken to theatre right away." Daniel was transferred immediately and put under. They were 20 minutes into surgery when he flatlined. Daniel found himself standing next to the operating table, watching as doctors and nurses shouted frantically to each other. He himself did not feel the least bit frantic. His eyes roamed about the room. He had never seen an operating theatre before. So many gadgets and shining surfaces. His eyes had only roamed briefly, before they were arrested by someone standing on the opposite side of the room. This person stood out because they were definitely not a nurse or a doctor. It was a woman, wearing a black gown with a hood that shrouded her head and hair. She was staring at him intently. He stared back at her. "Are you a nun?" he asked. At first the woman didn't reply. "Yes," she said. "I've never met a nun before," said Daniel. The woman suddenly smiled. "You have now." "This is St. Catherine's Hospital, isn't it?" asked Daniel. "Yes," replied the nun. "Oh, that makes sense then. Do you live here?" "I do." "We've got a rhythm," shouted a nurse. The straight line on the monitor now became jagged. "That was a close one," said the nurse, wiping perspiration from her forehead with her arm. "No shit," remarked the surgeon. Daniel came out of surgery an hour and a half later and was given a bed in the intensive care ward. When he opened his eyes, he saw Lizzie sitting on the chair next to him. "Hello," he croaked. Lizzie let out a sigh of relief and came forward. "How are you feeling?" "Sore." Lizzie nodded. "Okay. The doctors will be able to give you some strong painkillers for that." Daniel noticed a tube sticking out of the back of his hand, leading to a drip. "Don't worry about that." "I'm not." He was silent a moment. "I was trying to stop them fighting." I know. Leonard has been arrested. But I don't want you to concern yourself with that just now. Mark didn't sleep with Jenny. It was someone else." Lizzie's eyes went wide. "Someone slept with Jenny? She's only 15. Who was it?" "One of the other boys, but I don't know who." Daniel suddenly nodded towards the door. "The police are here." Lizzie turned to see 2 officers walking towards her. She left Daniel's side and went to speak to them. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you came with the boy from the foster home." "Yes, that's right. Lizzie, I'm one of the carers. We just need to get a formal statement from you about what happened." "Of course. I wasn't in the bedroom at the time, so I didn't actually witness the fight. But from what Daniel's told me, Leonard attacked Mark with a switchblade because he suspected him of sleeping with his girlfriend, Jenny Marsh. Daniel says it wasn't true." She stopped. "I'm sorry, I'm rambling. It's just adrenaline. How was Daniel involved?" "He says he tried to stop Leonard. I can quite believe that. Daniel's not a bad boy." Daniel had closed his eyes when Lizzie had gone over to the police. When he opened them again, about a minute later, the nun from the operating theatre was standing at the foot of his bed. "Hi," said Daniel. "Hello," replied the nun, smiling. "I came to see if you were all right." "I think so. Just painful." The nun nodded. making a sympathetic face. "I understand." "What's your name?" asked Daniel. "Sister Anna. But just call me Anna. Anna." "I'm Daniel, I know." "So do you go around speaking to patients?" asked Daniel. "Yes, but mainly the children that come here. I spend a lot of time on the children's ward. I am looking for him, you see." "Who?" asked Daniel. Just then he heard a commotion from another patient a few beds down from him. He turned to see what was going on. When he looked back, the nun who called herself Sister Anna had gone. Lizzie came back. "Did you see the nun?" asked Daniel. "What nun?" asked Lizzie, frowning. "She was just here. You must have missed her. She's a resident. She looks after the children." "Oh, okay. Did she speak to you?" "Yeah. I saw her in the operating theatre as well. She was watching the operation." Lizzie stared at him for a second. "You saw a nun during the operation?" "Yeah. I thought you were put to sleep." "I was, I think. But I had a break at one point. They allowed me to get off the table and stretch my legs. Then something went wrong with the equipment and the nurses were all panicking." Lizzie didn't know what to say. She had suddenly become positively creeped out at what Daniel was saying. Eventually she said, "Well, maybe she'll come back to say hello. But you need to excuse me for just now. I need to get some air. Will you be okay on your own?" Daniel nodded. "I won't be long." As she left the ward, a shiver passed right down through Lizzie's body, as if someone had walked over her grave. She didn't quite know what was wrong, only that what Daniel said just didn't sound right. She wanted to speak to the surgeon who had performed the operation. She went to ask for him, and 10 minutes later the surgeon appeared. "I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to know the details of the operation on Daniel Morgan. I'm Lizzie. I came in with him. Did everything go all right?" "Thankfully, yes. We had a moment, though, when he flatlined on us, and we had to revive him." Lizzie felt that chill again. "You mean he was technically dead for a period?" The surgeon nodded. "Yes. Tell me something else. Did he wake up at all during the operation and walk around?" The surgeon stared at her as if he thought she'd been drinking. No, madam," he replied. "That would never happen." "Why?" Lizzie had gone a shade paler. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the operation generally went well, but we will need to monitor him for the next few days. My colleague will come and speak to you about that." "Thank you. I'm sorry to bother you." No, it's fine." "Oh, one other thing. Is it customary for you to allow people to observe the operations?" "Well, sometimes medical students do, yes." "And nuns?" "Nuns?" quizzed the surgeon, raising his eyebrows. "Daniel said he saw a nun in the operating theatre." The surgeon stared at her for a moment without speaking. He clicked his tongue, as though he wanted to say something, but was stopping himself from doing so. Finally he said, "That's interesting." "Why?" Again the surgeon paused. He smiled awkwardly and scratched his neck. "Just say it." "We do have a resident ghost, ma'am. I've never encountered her myself, but she's a nun, and usually it's children who see her. This place used to be a nunnery." "Oh my God." "She isn't malevolent, apparently. If you want to know more, you should speak to Dr. Malone. He's the hospital manager. He has all the sightings of her, filed in a notebook." Lizzie knocked on the door of Dr. Malone's office. "Come in." Dr. Malone was sitting behind his desk. He had glasses and greying hair. He smiled pleasantly at her. "Can I help?" "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, I was actually just about to go on my break." "Oh, it's not important. I can come back later. Don't be silly. Come on in. I'm just going to make some coffee. Would you like some?" "Actually, yes, please. Black." Lizzie explained who she was and about Daniel. "I'm very sorry to hear that," replied Dr. Malone, putting on his most professional tone. "Please have a seat and tell me what I can do for you." Lizzie sat herself down. She cleared her throat. I understand you know about..." She paused. "About?" "Your resident ghost," she said slowly. "Oh, yes, indeed I do." He came back to the desk with the coffee and sat down. After a pause, he said, "Daniel's seen her, hasn't he?" "How do you..." "I'm guessing." It's usually children who see her. You say he flatlined in surgery? Yes. Quite often when people flatline, they have what we call out-of-body experiences, where they find themselves literally outside looking on. It is quite possible that that's what Daniel described to you, and while in that state he saw Sister Anna. Is that her name? Dr. Malone nodded. So you know who she is? Children who have interacted with her say she calls herself Sister Anna, or simply Anna. Dr. Malone took a sip of coffee. I did some research on the nunnery that used to exist where the hospital is today. In fact, there are still some of the original walls in the grounds, although the buildings have all gone. I spoke to a local historian about the sightings, which had been reported ever since the hospital was built. She told me that a nun named Sister Anna Stone committed suicide due to the death of a child she'd been looking after in the infirmary. Apparently there are documents written by the Mother Superior at the time. We're talking 1700s here. Dr. Malone took another sip of coffee. They found her body the morning after the death of the child. It seems she'd thrown herself off the roof. Jesus, muttered Lizzie. Why is she still here? Dr. Malone shook his head and shrugged. Well, that we can only surmise. Although back then it was a sin to take your own life, so perhaps she is afraid to cross over to the other side. I suppose so. Lizzie brooded for a while, letting the coffee cool a bit. I saw something when I was Daniel's age. She looked up at Dr. Malone. It was here. She drank now, not caring how hot it was. When she spoke again, it was almost a whisper. I was in to have my appendix out. They put me on the children's ward to recover. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. The ward was completely quiet and mostly in darkness, except for a few lights. And that's when I saw this black figure standing at the edge of the light. All I could make out was that it looked like a nun. It didn't move the entire time I was looking at it, but it seemed that I couldn't take my eyes away from what I was seeing. And the longer I looked, this feeling came over me. It was a feeling of complete sadness. At one point I realized that tears were rolling down my cheeks. It was like I could feel what she was feeling, her pain. Eventually I just turned over and went back to sleep. Now I'm wondering if that's who I saw. It's more than likely. I never spoke to anyone about the incident, but it's something I've never forgotten. Ever since then, this hospital has always made me feel uncomfortable. When I was instructed to go with Daniel, I couldn't help feeling reluctant in a way. Dr. Malone nodded. I don't think Daniel knows that what he's interacting with is a ghost, and I'm not about to tell him. Oh no, I quite agree. Lizzie stayed with Daniel until 6 o'clock. I have to go back now, she said gently. Will you be okay? I'll be fine. When I come back tomorrow, I'll bring you some of your things, like your iPod and some fresh clothes. I'll put a bag together. Thank you, said Daniel. Lizzie left St. Catherine's as quickly as possible and got a taxi back to the home. Daniel lay in his bed, sometimes catching snatches of sleep, sometimes looking around him at the other patients. Nurses would come and check on him every hour. Eventually, as the night drew on, he fell fast asleep. He woke at 2 in the morning. The intensive care ward was quiet, except for the beeps of monitors. He lay for a few seconds, before realizing she was there, sitting on the chair by his side. He turned to look at her. Her expression was one of kind concern. How are you feeling? She asked. A bit better. What time is it? It is 2 o'clock. Daniel frowned. Why are you up so late? It doesn't matter to me what time it is, she replied frankly. I wanted to talk to you, to ask you something. All right, said Daniel. What was it you wanted to ask me? What happened to your parents? My dad left when I was a baby, and my mum is a drug addict. The court deemed her unfit to look after me, so I was put into care. I live in a big house with other kids who have come from either broken homes or their parents are dead. What happened to you there? She asked. One of the boys has a girlfriend called Jenny. She's a bit of a flirt, to be honest. Well, this guy, Leonard, found out she was sleeping with someone on the side, and he thought it was my friend, Mark, except it wasn't. Anyway, Leonard must have got hold of a switchblade from somewhere, and when he came back to the house he tried to stab Mark with it. I went in to stop him, and I got stabbed myself." Sister Anna's eyes were wide with shock as she listened. "That's awful! You poor boy! And you nearly died." "Did I?" Sister Anna nodded. "But you're alive, and you're going to get better. I'm going to make sure you do." Sister Anna spoke with conviction. "I'm going to keep an eye on you." She paused. "You remind me—" The nun suddenly stopped speaking and lowered her head. "I remind you of what?" asked Daniel. "Of a boy I once knew. He had an injury much like yours, but his was caused by a bull. He didn't make it. I was very sad." She paused again. "Very sad. I still am." "I'm sorry," said Daniel. "You even look like him. Robbie, his name was. A sweet boy. And like you, he had no parents to look after him. He lived rough. You at least have a roof over your head and people to care for you. That woman Lizzie, she seems very devoted to you." Daniel nodded. "She's really nice," he agreed. "I know her. She came here as a child. I visited her in the children's ward. I think we connected." Daniel frowned. "I know it's rude to ask, but how old are you?" 24. "Then how could you have been here when Lizzie was a little girl?" At that moment a nurse approached his bed. "Morning," she whispered. "Can you not sleep?" "I'm sleeping on enough." The nurse checked the monitor and ticked a few things off a chart at the end of his bed. "I heard you having a little conversation to yourself," said the nurse, smiling. "I do that all the time. My colleagues call me mad." Daniel stared at the nurse, and then at Sister Anna. "I'm talking to her," he replied, pointing to the nun. The nurse frowned as Daniel pointed towards the empty chair. "Who?" she asked. "Sister Anna." The nurse froze. In the next moment she turned and ran from the ward. "Okay," muttered Daniel, thoroughly confused. He looked at Sister Anna. "Why did she run away?" "Because she cannot see me." "What do you mean she can't see you? She's not blind." "Daniel, you asked me a moment ago how old I was, and how it was that I was able to visit Lizzie when she was a child." Daniel nodded. "The fact is I have been here for hundreds of years, Daniel. I never left. I couldn't leave. Not without Robbie. I have looked for him. Every boy that comes into the hospital, I hope it is Robbie. Wait, stop. What are you saying?" "I'm dead, Daniel. I'm dead." Daniel sat bolt upright, nearly ripping the tube out of his hand. For the moment he was oblivious to the pain the sudden movement had caused to his stomach. "You're a ghost?" he shrieked. Sister Anna nodded. Daniel frowned again. "But you can't be a ghost. I can't see through you." "Not all ghosts are transparent. I am able to appear in physical form." Daniel gingerly stuck out a hand and touched her. "Definitely physical," he said. Then he cocked his head at her. "Prove it to me," he said. "Prove to me you're a ghost." In the next second, the woman before him began to fade, until she disappeared entirely. Daniel's mouth fell open. He stared at the empty chair. Then he looked around him, as if expecting her to appear somewhere else. "Okay, I believe you," he gasped. "Good," came Sister Anna's voice from behind him. Daniel yelped and spun his head back round to the chair. There she was again, sitting exactly as she had been a moment ago. "I'm dreaming. This must be a dream." "Why must it be a dream? Ghosts do exist, Daniel. I've just proved it to you." "No, my child. You are fully awake. Perhaps even more than you have ever been before. You are getting another glimpse into the universe." Daniel still sat upright. "Lie back, sweetheart." Her voice was so soothing and reassuring that he did as she said. "So how did you die?" asked Daniel gently. "I died by my own hand. I took the life that God gave me, and in doing so I committed a grave sin." "Why was it a sin?" "It was against the law to take your own life, because the Church stated that a life given by God is a gift you should not destroy." A tear rolled down Sister Anna's right cheek. "I did, and I do not think he will forgive me. I sometimes wonder whether that is why I have never met up with Robbie again. He is punishing me." Daniel shook his head. "I don't think so," he said, trying to soothe her now. "I don't go to church myself, but I have heard ministers talk about God as a loving, entity. I know he is loving, Daniel, but even God has his limits. And when it comes to betrayal, for that is what I feel it is, I think that is where he draws the line. Somehow I have to make amends." Over the next few days, Daniel had more conversations with Sister Anna. His condition slowly got better. He actually found it quite exciting to know he had a ghost friend. Lizzie brought his things, and he was able, carefully, and with the drip still attached to him, to make it to the bathroom with the aid of a nurse. One of them was the nurse who had fled the ward the other night, Nurse Warren. She looked uncomfortable around him. On their way back from the toilet, she asked, "I apologize for acting a bit oddly the other day. This place gives me the creeps sometimes." She laughed nervously. Daniel looked up at her. "Have you ever seen her yourself?" Nurse Warren stopped walking. "What?" she asked, with a slight look of fear in her eyes. "Sister Anna. The ghost." The nurse swallowed hard and licked her lips, as though they were very dry. "You have, haven't you?" "No," she replied, "but I have heard her." "Heard her?" "While walking the corridors during night shift. I have heard a woman sobbing. It echoes. It puts the wind up me. Other nurses have heard her too." "Have you really spoken to her?" "A few times. She is sad. That's probably why she cries. There was a boy who died. I remind her of him, apparently. She can't leave here until she's found him." "Oh my God," whispered the nurse. It began that night. The infection entered Daniel's body like an assassin enters a house under cover of darkness. When the nurse checked him in the morning, she noticed pimple-like bumps on his skin. She immediately informed the doctor. When the doctor saw it, his face became grave, and he swore under his breath. "I think it's MRSA. I'll do a thorough check." He performed a culture test on Daniel, and the results showed that it was indeed MRSA, the superbug. "This is extremely serious," said the doctor. "We need to inform Lizzie as soon as she comes in." "What can we do?" asked his colleague. "We'll try him on different antibiotics. Maybe one might work alone, or we fight it by using a combination of antibiotics. As we know, MRSA is resistant to the stuff, and if it doesn't work, there's a high possibility that this child will die." Sister Anna was standing next to the doctor as he said these words. As soon as he had finished, Anna flew to Daniel's bedside. She felt the fear and the pain all over again. There was sweat on the boy's brow, and his eyes were closed. "Lord, don't let this happen again," she said. "I cannot take any more. Have I not been punished enough?" When Lizzie came in, she was informed of the situation, and she went with the doctor to see him. Lizzie put a trembling hand over her mouth. "We will do everything we possibly can, I promise you," said the doctor. Lizzie nodded. Then she shook her head. "Just when he was getting better. How can this happen? In a hospital?" "I agree, Lizzie, and it shouldn't happen." "I'm going to stay with him tonight. Do you hear me? I am not leaving him." The doctor nodded. "Very well. I'll see if I can get a comfier chair in here for you." Lizzie watched as the doctor gave him antibiotics through his drip. She sat throughout the entire day, only moving to get a sandwich and a coffee from the cafeteria. When visiting hours were over and the hospital quietened, she settled down for a long vigil. But sleep got in the way, and eventually she slumped in the chair. He was checked on every half hour, and the next morning the doctors and nurses had a meeting about his progress. He had developed shivers now as well. "We'll try a different antibiotic," said the doctor. This was administered, and again Lizzie sat all day by his bed. He didn't stir. Another night came, and another day passed. Daniel's condition continued to deteriorate. Lizzie was exhausted. She had barely slept a wink. "I really think you should go home and get some rest," said the doctor. "There's no point in staying here. Leave me your number and I will call you every day with an update, and I'll give you my pager number as well." Lizzie reluctantly agreed. But as she left the hospital, she really felt like she was leaving Daniel to die. The moment she got in the back of the cab, she began to cry. She had been at the home when he had been brought to them, a scared 6-year-old who had never experienced a safe environment in which to live. He didn't know what to make of this one. He was greeted by a sea of kids, ranging from his age to teenagers. Lizzie had opened the door to him and the female police officer. She had squatted down to speak to him.
"Good afternoon. You must be Daniel."
Daniel nodded without saying a word.
"My name's Lizzie. I'm one of the workers here. You are just in time for lunch. It's pizza, and I'm talking takeaway style, not boring supermarket pizza."
The policewoman laughed.
Daniel was wearing a red rucksack and blue jacket, and a soft toy dog was clutched in his left hand. With the other he held on to the officer. "Who's this?"
"Rocky," replied Daniel, in a very quiet voice.
"That's a good name."
Lizzie glanced at her watch.
"Well, lunch is in 15 minutes, so that will give us just enough time to go and see your room. Do you want to come with me, and we can go and do that now?"
Again a little nervous nod.
"Okay."
She rose, and the policewoman and Daniel followed her upstairs to a decent-sized room with 2 beds. On one of these beds sat a blond 8-year-old boy playing a game on his phone. He stopped when they entered.
"Daniel, I'd like you to meet Mark. You're going to be sharing with him."
Mark stood up.
"Hi," he said cheerily.
Mark's been here 2 years now, and knows the way things work, so he'll look after you. He also came here when he was 6. Didn't you, Mark?
"Yeah,"
replied Mark, nodding.
"It's a nice place."
Lizzie helped Daniel put his rucksack down on his bed next to the window. She then helped him off with his jacket, although it was slightly awkward as he was still holding Rocky. "Are you going to leave Rocky here, or would you like to take him to lunch?"
"Take him," replied Daniel.
"Driver," shouted Lizzie, "I've changed my mind. Can you take me to the North Craze Children's Home, please?" It was a Saturday, so when she arrived most of the children were there. Some of the younger ones running around, the older ones in their rooms or out. She went straight upstairs to Daniel's room. She paused in the doorway. Mark was sitting on his bed, his legs up, his face buried in his knees. "Mark," she said softly. He looked up. His eyes were red. She went to him and he hugged her. "I know. I'm the same. How is he?" She didn't immediately answer. "He's doing all right. The doctors are looking after him well. I promise." Mark nodded. "He tried to help me. I just think it's my fault." A fresh wave of sobbing racked Mark's body. "No, Mark, listen to me. It's not your fault. It's Leonard's. He brought the knife in and caused all this." Sister Anna roamed the quiet corridors, consumed with her demons. She walked every inch, wringing her hands as she paced. "Lord, forgive me," she kept saying over and over. "Do not punish an innocent child for my sins. Let him live this time. I ask for your mercy, Lord. I came to you once for help, after I'd been shunned by everybody else." She suddenly fell to her knees. "What is wrong with me? Why did my children die? Were they all correct? Was I a bad person all along? Why do you keep taking children from me?" she screamed. "My own, Robbie, and now this boy." She wept bitterly now, as the pain of her loss overwhelmed her. "My babies. I missed them so much." She clutched her stomach, as if holding her womb. Nurse Warren was doing her rounds of the patients when she heard it. The agonized cry of a woman. But she knew at once it was not any patient, because she recognized the sound. And it was closer than she'd ever heard it before, literally around the next corner. A cold shiver ran the length of her spine, and her heart began to pound with fear. She needed to go that way. She slowly moved forward, walking as though the floor were a thin sheet of ice over a deep lake. When she reached the end of the wall, her whole body had stiffened with apprehension. "You have to do your job," she told herself. With a sudden boldness she stepped into the next corridor. She saw it immediately, a black figure, low to the ground, She let out a scream and began to run. But she suddenly stopped. What was she running from? An apparition? Or simply a desperate soul who needed help? She turned back. The figure was still there, weeping sorrowfully. Nurse Warren began to tentatively approach. "Sister Anna?" she said, speaking low. The figure turned a stricken face towards her. "I have to save him," she said. "It is the only way to save myself." "I know," replied Nurse Warren, "and we will do our best to help you." "Do you think I am a bad person?" asked Sister Anna. Nurse Warren found herself crouching down. She shook her head. "No." "My family did. My husband did. All I wanted was children. I didn't get that. They all died. God took them from me. Why? Was it to protect them from me?" "No, Anna. Babies can die at birth or be miscarried. It happens all over the world to many different women, and it has nothing to do with the character of the mother. You must believe that." Sister Anna sniffed. Nurse Warren had almost forgotten she was speaking with a ghost. Sister Anna was completely physical. The only thing that differentiated her from Nurse Warren was that she threw no shadow on the floor, and the distress in this woman was appealing to Nurse Warren's natural humanity. "This illness will kill him if we do not stop it. You know that." "Yes, I know it," replied Nurse Warren sadly. "But perhaps with your help we can kill it first. I will pray over him." Sister Anna stood next to Daniel's bed and placed her hands over the top of him. "Dear Lord, let what healing energy I may have pass into this boy. I ask for all the angels of heaven to come forward and help me. Let their energy merge with mine. This boy will remain on the earth plane. He shall not cross over yet. It is not his time." Sister Anna closed her eyes and repeated firmly, "It is not his time." She felt suddenly warm. The warmth was coming from all around her. It quickly intensified until it was like a furnace, and then she began to see them. There were hundreds. They filled the entire ward. Beautiful, bright white figures that glowed with a stunning light. The angels had come. Tears flowed freely down the nun's face. They had answered her call. They were showing mercy. "Thank you," she sobbed. Another light began to appear, this time around Daniel, shimmering blue like ethereal water. Healing water. It flowed through his body, washing out the vile bug that had settled there. "Anna!" The nun gasped. "I know that voice. Robbie, where are you?" She looked round frantically, and then she saw him, for the first time in 2 centuries, her dear Robbie, running towards her through the light. In tow were 2 little children. "Robbie!" she screamed. She ran towards the boy and hugged him to her with all her might. "I've missed you so much. Where have you been?" "In heaven," he cried. "Waiting for you." He laughed. "They've been waiting too." The 2 little ones, a boy and a girl, grinned up at her eagerly. And in that instant Sister Anna knew exactly who they were. "Oh, my Lord!" she exclaimed. "It's my children!" She bent down and scooped them up, tears of pure joy running down her face. "Oh, my darlings!" she said, kissing them alternately. Robbie laughed. It was the most delightful sound she had ever heard. "Come on," he shouted. "There's so many great things to see and do, and so many more people that are waiting for you." "I'm coming," she replied, and holding her children in her arms, she followed Robbie into the light. Lizzie got the call at 7 o'clock the following morning. "He's recovered. All signs of the bug gone. I would go so far as to say it's a miracle." Lizzie tried to stifle her relieved tears. "I think it is," she said.